It was another cold, icy winter's day at Dishonest Used Car Dealership. I was sitting nursing a hangover when I heard our Incompetent Tech Guy come in and march into Colossal Redneck's office. The door closed, there was a minute or two of brief, muted conversation, and then Colossal Redneck began bellowing his stupid laugh. Ha ha ha. That is the stupidest thing that ever has been said. 1, y'all didn't buy your car from us, so we ain't got to do warranty repair on it. And 2, what you're telling me, it ain't even broke. I was thoroughly confused. Incompetent Tech Guy marched out of Colossal Redneck's office and slammed the door behind him, only to come across the hall and march into mine. Great. Incompetent Tech Guy said the 4WD system is out on my Jeep and I want it fixed. He had a new Jeep Wrangler, the vehicle he owned before he purchased the black Power Stroke he became so known for. When he first came to the company, he had a haggard old Corolla, and suddenly he could afford to buy a new car every 6 months. Obviously, taking control of the company's cash flow had paid some dividends. I told him, well, just so you know, it's under factory warranty. So if you want something fixed on it, it's got to go to the Chrysler dealership at the end of the street. They'll fix you up. He replied, no, they're refusing to fix it. I want it done here. This didn't sound like the Chrysler dealership I knew. We didn't have dealings with them often, but the few times I had gotten parts from them for my own Jeep or sent in cars to fix things we didn't want to handle, they had been competent and honest. I could immediately tell I was in for one of those conversations. I asked, why don't you tell me what's going on? He explained, this morning, coming out of my apartment, I had it in 4WD on account of the ice and the tires spun. Obviously, the 4WD isn't working right, but Chrysler says it's working as designed. That's not acceptable. Now, permit me a brief aside while I explain how a differential works. You see, when your car goes around a corner, the wheels on the outside of the curve traverse a longer arc than the inside wheels, which means they have to rotate faster to keep up. If the wheels were forced to go the same speed, either the inside tires would scrub or the outside tires would drag, and turning would be extremely difficult, as the car would want to just push forward in a straight line. Cars, therefore, have a piece of equipment called a differential, or diff, between their drive wheels, which splits power left and right, and allows differential rotation between the wheels. Differentials come in a few different flavors, but the cheapest and by far the most common is called an open diff. An open diff isn't a clever object. It doesn't care whether both wheels are going the same speed or if one is stopped and the other is going 600 miles per hour. You can also have a locking diff, which, as the name implies, locks the wheels together either on command or automatically. This gives maximum traction, but sacrifices turning ability when locked. These are commonly found on serious off-roaders and are available as aftermarket parts for Jeeps and trucks. These require a driver who knows what they're doing. There are other varieties as well, like limited slip diffs, but they don't factor into our story today. Incompetent Tech Guy's Jeep was four-wheel drive, but it had open diffs front and rear. That meant if encountered really slick conditions, one wheel on each end of the vehicle could theoretically lose traction and render the Jeep stuck. The vast majority of four-wheel drive vehicles are this way, and it's still far better than two-wheel drive when it gets slippery out. However, it does tend to throw new owners for a loop if they're operating off a misconception about how the system works. He was, of course, operating under this very misconception. I explained all of the above to him, but he wasn't having any of it. We eventually settled into the sort of circular impasse we always settled into, where he kept repeating himself and I kept repeating myself, until Colossal Redneck walked in and broke the cycle. Colossal Redneck said, "All right, IDG, your car is doing how it's designed, and Chrysler ain't going to warranty it, and we sure as hell ain't either. But I tell you what, we can get a locking diff for your rear axle and put that in, and you'll get all kind of better traction." The problem with aftermarket locking diffs is that they start expensive and go up from there. Incompetent Tech Guy was probably embezzling money from the company, but he apparently wasn't embezzling quite enough. So he settled on the very cheapest solution called a lunchbox locker, which is a variety of locking differential that automatically locks up when power is applied. Lunchboxes are kind of terrible, but they do work. The problem, though, is that they can be unpredictable and snap, from unlocked to locked with minor provocation. They also make ugly noises and require careful driving to avoid having it lock on a corner and push you off into a tree. On a short wheelbase vehicle like a Wrangler, they can be even scarier, as they can cause the tail of the vehicle to whip around if you goose the throttle when turning on a slippery surface. Most people I know with them use them on vehicles that spend most of their lives off-road. Colossal Redneck ordered the new diff for him, and Tech Guy pranced off, proclaiming that he was somehow going to get Chrysler to pay for its installation since that's how it should have been in the first place. Colossal Redneck came back into my office with a grin. I said, "What are you so smug about? This is a stupid idea. He's going to hate a lunchbox in that thing." He laughed. "I know. It's going to be fucking hilarious the first time he drives a thing with that lunchbox banging around back there." I asked, "You think he's got even the slightest idea how to drive a vehicle with a lunchbox?" Colossal Redneck replied, "Hell no, but y'all don't see me giving a shit, do ya?" A week later, Tech Guy's new differential insert arrived, and Mr. Sarcastic pulled the Jeep into his service bay to swap it in. It was another icy day, and a few hours later, Mr. Sarcastic returned from his test drive. He walked into my office, eyes wide, skin pale as a ghost. Mr. Sarcastic said, "Holy fuck, dude, that thing is a handful." I asked, "Don't like a lunchbox, huh?" He replied, "Nah, it ain't so much that I had a lunchbox in my old Toyota, but that short wheelbase on that Jeep, it's pretty spooky on the ice out there. A couple times the diff locked mid-corner, and the tail just stepped out on me. That 4-liter engine has enough torque that when it starts heading sideways, it does it in a hurry. $5 says he doesn't make it a week before sliding sideways into something." I said, I know. Colossal Redneck put him up to this. It'll be on him when he crashes into a busload of nuns or whatever." Mr. Sarcastic shook his head at the whole situation and retreated to his bay. I instant messaged Tech Guy and let him know his car was done. He immediately appeared from upstairs, and I went over the invoice with him and informed him of how he was going to have to handle his lunchbox-equipped Jeep. He was listening to very little of what came out of my mouth, since he was too busy working himself up into a holy rage against Chrysler. He was pretty convinced that Chrysler was going to pay his invoice for him, and against my wishes, the conversation rapidly drifted into a minimally coherent rant and fantasy scenario of how he was going to shove this invoice down their throats. Needless to say, I was skeptical that he was going to have much luck. I asked, "So, how would you like to pay today? Cash, credit, or would you like payroll to pull out your check?" He shouted, "N.O., haven't you been listening? Chrysler will pay for this. I will make them pay." Before I had a chance to interject, Tech Guy snatched the invoice off my desk and marched out to his Jeep. I watched Colossal Redneck dart out his office, the fastest I had ever seen him move. He waved me out to follow. Colossal Redneck grinned. "You smell that? Something stupid's about to happen." Sure enough, as we watched in the bay door, Tech Guy fired up his Jeep and, fueled by his righteous anger at the Chrysler Corporation, who had so fraudulently given him the exact vehicle he had purchased, punched the throttle. The big inline-six engine roared, and the Jeep launched itself from its parking spot. He whipped the wheel to the left, and predictably, the Jeep's tail kicked to the side. With a cringe-inducing crunch, the passenger rear of the Jeep slammed against the side of the building. Our building was made of Cold War-era concrete, so other than a couple of off scratches to the paint was fine, but the same could not be said for the Jeep, which was now thoroughly crunched. There was a typical screaming match, but Colossal Redneck had done a remarkable job covering services' asses in the paperwork. It wasn't all quite English, the disclaimer, but he had managed to copy and paste the whole blameless agreement from the lunchbox manufacturer into the invoice. Underneath, Tech Guy had signed, probably having not even bothered to read the big bold text stating, "OFFROAD use only." He was stuck with the lunchbox, though as a courtesy, Colossal Redneck had Mr. Sarcastic swap the original diff back in. Mr. Sarcastic graciously placed a greasy box full of lunchbox locker on a pile of paperwork on the passenger seat of the Jeep. Epilogue. I was standing out in the service bay during the technician's lunch break, only a couple weeks after the incident, when Colossal Redneck walked up to survey how things were going. I asked, "Hey, that green Wrangler on the lift, do you know anything about it?" I can't find on the schedule, and the techs are out to lunch. He replied, "Oh, that there's mine." I said, "I didn't know you had a Wrangler. What's it in for?" He grinned. "Yeah, I don't drive it much. It's my off-roading toy. You know, a friend of ours was trying to get rid of a lunchbox locker real cheap, and I was thinking I'd do him a favor and take it off his hands. Just so happens he has a Wrangler, too." It took me a second, and then it clicked. I looked at him and said, "You clever bastard,